Hello everyone, my name is Protesilaos, also known as Prot. In this video I want to talk about a topic that I have addressed several times in private conversations, but I feel needs to be brought up in the public sphere as well. And this is the general theme of switching to Emacs. I get messages, emails or other forms which go along the lines of hello there, I have watched some of your videos on Emacs. They seem to be very interesting. Emacs looks like a sort of a cool thing, and I want to ask you whether I should switch over to Emacs or not. And these are the kind of points that I bring up in those conversations, and I want to share these with you in this video blog that I am presenting right now. Unlike previous video blogs of mine, this one will also have a live presentation, so I have prepared some text here that I will be sharing with you. Of course, as you can imagine, this is all done in Emacs, and this is just some plain text which is presented in a sort of a prettier way using built-in Emacs mechanisms such as the ability to narrow the view to a portion of the buffer. But let's not go into that. Maybe we can discuss it a bit after we do the presentation. Now the topic I want to address is this of switching to Emacs, whether you might want to do it or you may be better off without it. And the four major themes I want to cover is the fact that Emacs needs to be understood as a platform rather than a simple standard text editor. Then I want to proceed and talk a bit about the key bindings that Emacs has and why they may not be as crazy as they seem to be, why there is some method to this perceived madness. Then I want to address the issue that perhaps all things considered, you may not want to switch to Emacs after all. You may be better off with what you have or with some other option. And I want to conclude this presentation with some notes on the fact that Emacs is a longer-term commitment. It is not some project you pick over the weekend and by Sunday's end you have become an expert in it. It doesn't work that way. We will talk about this in detail. So let's proceed with our presentation over here and see how it goes. So first, Emacs as a platform. What I have over here are the absolute essentials you need to know in order to appreciate this fact. Emacs is not just a text editor. It was conceived from the outset as an interpreter of the Lisp programming language, specifically a dialect of Lisp called Emacs Lisp. So the core of the Emacs codebase is written in the C programming language, but the vast corpus of this codebase, the vast majority of the code over there, is written in Emacs Lisp. And Emacs Lisp is in effect used as the basis for evaluating more Emacs Lisp. So in effect, Emacs can evaluate itself and extend itself that way. Emacs was never meant to just edit text. It was designed from the very beginning to be able to be extended in order to meet the particular needs of the user. Extensibility is, in my opinion, and I would assume in the opinion of every Emacs user out there, at least of those that have put some thought into it, extensibility is the quintessential Emacs quality. It is the irreducible factor of what makes Emacs Emacs. If you take extensibility out of it, then you are left with something that is totally different. I wouldn't be interested in that kind of thing. And the point of extensibility is that you can modify any piece of eLisp, whether it is in the native code base or some eLisp that comes from external sources, whether it is the eLisp that you write yourself or some other developer. You can evaluate it in real time, and this means that you can modify existing functionality or define new modes of behavior that Emacs will adhere to. And you can do this in real time just by evaluating some eLisp. Extensibility presupposes introspectable functionality. This means that using Emacs, you can look into the insides of Emacs in order to appreciate what is going on, in order to understand what is at play. You can use introspection to find documentation about every aspect of Emacs, about the key bindings, about the functions that you are calling, about the mode that you are running, about everything basically. You can see what functions a key binding invokes, and you can study the source code of that function directly from inside of Emacs. It is readily available. So Emacs is all about extensibility and being introspectable, and all this because it is a Lisp interpreter. Moving on, extensibility is of course a blessing once you get used to it and see the potential of it. Because extensibility means that Emacs can now easily become your interface to any kind of text-heavy operation, any kind of text-heavy command, any kind of text-heavy duty can be handled by Emacs. For example, you can use Emacs to read your email. You can use it to parse and read your news feeds, your RSS feeds. You can use it to play back music and to manage your playlist and your music collection. You can, of course, do all sorts of file management operations, copy, delete files, move them around, create directories, change permissions, all of that. And of course you can use it for the various accoutrements of org mode. Many people are already familiar with these and consider them a killer feature of Emacs. So the ability to maintain your agenda, your calendar, your to-do list, and all the other goodies that org mode provides, including this very presentation that I am doing here. It leverages org mode and some basic Emacs functionality I already mentioned. And you can do all this because exactly Emacs is extensible. And you can not only just extend it in different ways, you can also combine these extensions into more advanced, into emergent workflows. For example, I have a couple of videos where I show you how I manage my music collection using a package called Bongo. It's an external package. This handles music playback and playlists and that kind of stuff. With the built-in directory editor, Dired, I use those two in tandem to manage my music in a very simple yet super effective way, at least for the kind of job that I want to do with it. You can combine other things you can do that I have tested. You can read email inside of mu4e. This is an email client. And you can, while you are reading that email, use org capture. This is a specific command of org mode to convert that email into a to-do item, into a task, and optionally, if you define it, to place a direct link back to that email. So when you are viewing that task, you can always follow that link back to the email. So it doesn't matter whether you receive 1 million emails a day, you can always go back to the original message and operate and act on it. This is absolutely great if you need to boost your productivity in your email. And of course the same principle applies when you are reading your feeds and when you are doing other things inside of Emacs as well. There is an intrinsic interconnectedness. Everything is connected when you are working inside of Emacs. Let's move on. I believe that it is fruitful, interesting, and fecund to think of Emacs as a front-end, general purpose controller of your operating system. And I would like to see Emacs as a customizable interface of all the wonderful Unix tools that we are familiar with, the kind of stuff that you run on the command line inside of a terminal emulator. For example, I have a table here that draws some examples from the very recent videos that I have done. For example, the directory editor, the built-in directory editor, Dired, is a wrapper around the cd, ls, cp, mv, rm, make dir. So all these commands are bundled in Dired, and when you are using Dired, you are effectively using one of these commands in the background or something that is equivalent to these. Building on top of that, you have a combination of the find command and all of the above, all that Dired offers in addition to find, the same principle for grep. And of course, these combined with the fact that you can edit the buffers means that you can go from the find command to a directory listing and then use that to search and replace in multiple files. I have videos on the matter. And I have another couple of examples here, a front end for rip grep and a front end from fzdef. And in my last two videos, I have shown how you can combine these with other actions and have more advanced workflows using these and the other actions. You can check my backlog. It doesn't really matter right now. The point is that Emacs offers interactivity. So when you are doing things, you are always receiving some live feedback. This is unlike what you are used to when you are working in a terminal, where you enter a command, you hit the return key, you get some output, and then you have to refine the command again if you want to get some different output. Whereas here, everything happens in real time. You don't have to do that kind of loop over and over again. You are still using the Unix tools when you are using Emacs, but you get, in my opinion, a more user-friendly experience, a more dynamic kind of workflow. Okay, so some other uses of Emacs. You might be surprised to know that Emacs also implements a text editor, and I use the term implements exactly because this is the case. Remember, Emacs is a Lisp interpreter, and the text editing capabilities are just another extension of this interpreter, because we said Emacs is not just a text editor. So other things that Emacs can do, it can multiplex windows. What Emacs calls windows is what other applications may call splits or panes. I think Vim calls them splits and Emacs calls them panes. I'm not sure right now. The point is, it's when you take the screen and divide it, those subdivisions are the windows or splits or panes or whatever. The point is that Emacs can handle those very nicely. Once you extend it that way, of course, it can be more precise depending on what you want to do. Emacs can easily switch between your recent or your open files or windows using a buffer list. And of course, when you combine this with powerful search mechanisms, you can quickly narrow down the list of candidates to where you want to go, and you can be very fast and efficient when selecting the file or buffer or whatever. You can be very fast in doing so and move there right away. It's very nice, a very nice workflow. Combine all these with the fact that you have the interactivity over the Unix tools, and you also have keyboard macros, search and replace, and those other things that the text editor has, and you get basically a complete package, a general purpose tool for interacting with your operating system. But Emacs can be extended even further. There is, for example, a package called exwm, which extends Emacs to also function as a window manager for the X display server. In case you are not familiar with the term window manager, you can look it up, of course, but basically this is very popular in some sections of the free software community. A window manager is the program that places windows on your screen, and there is a subset of these window managers that place windows on the screen using a tiling metaphor. So the idea is that every window occupies a rectangular area on your screen and windows are placed next to each other rather than the default, the standard, the traditional way of windows being represented as a stack on top of each other. So a tiling window manager, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that Emacs can also do that because it is a Lisp interpreter. If you write the proper Lisp for it, it will do what you ask it to do. Let's move on to the next topic, Emacs keys. Many people feel that Emacs keys are completely nuts. They feel that they make no sense whatsoever. And while I can understand the fact that Emacs keys may be very difficult, very unfamiliar, I would argue that they are not totally crazy. They are based on minimonix and they follow some rather simple conventions. So if you take some time to learn the basics, you can quickly expand from there, and then you will appreciate the thinking, the underlying rationale that goes into them. So you will understand why they are not crazy at all. But let's discuss this in some further detail. Let's start with the first commands you will learn day one of your Emacs usage. Control X and Meta X. Control X is a prefix for invoking a command by the key that is representing it. So you press Control X and then some key combination, and this calls a specific function. Whereas Meta and X is related to that, but is the extended version of that. So when you do Meta and X, you are calling a command not by the key binding that represents it, but by its unique name. And this is the kind of basic binary that Emacs follows. Control does one thing that is fairly small in scope, and then Meta does another similar thing that is broader in scope. This is usually the case. So for example, in the basic motions, you have Control F to move forward one character, and then you have Meta F to move forward one word, and building on that, you have Control Meta and F to move forward one balanced expression or one symbolic expression, as I believe is the name in Emacs Lisp terminology. And of course you can expect these to work the same way for going backward and things of that nature. What matters here is that there is a pattern here. You have small, which is the control modifier key, larger operations, which involve the meta key, and then the largest possible operations that involve control meta and control and meta and then some key rather. But let's discuss this a bit further. Once you have a bit of experience using these mnemonics as well, you will be able to remember a lot of things. And I offer here the example that is used for introspection, what I mentioned earlier, which is that once you know that Control H is the universal prefix, the universal key for help inside of Emacs, H of course for help, you can quickly recall a lot of actions related to that. For example, if you press the key called Control H and then the letter F, that stands for documentation concerning functions. If you do the same but use the letter K, you get a help prompt for key bindings. So if you issue any key binding, it will tell you whether it is bound to a function or not, and what that function is, with a link to the source code as well. So this is fantastic actually. Control HM does the same thing for modes. You will get documentation about the major mode you are in and the minor modes that you have active, and you will also see the key bindings that the major mode defines, the current major mode, and again links to the source code as well. And then the same for variables, and there are some others as well. Furthermore, now that you know about Control H, when you are in the middle of typing a key chord, you might forget the possible completion candidates. At any point, you can hit Ctrl and H when you are in the middle of typing something, some command, and it will produce a list with all the possible candidates. This works by default, but there is also a package called which key, which makes the presentation a bit nicer or intuitive, perhaps. But the fundamentals are the same. The point is that you can always introspect Emacs, and you can do that just by knowing that Ctrl H is for help. Let's see how we can extend this even further. Minimonix are great because they allow you to scale your knowledge fairly easily. It's fairly easy to expand once you know, once you understand the basics of how Emacs defines its keys, and you use basic principles over here. And I have a table here with some of the commands that I have. These are all these over here are search commands. So they start with the prefix meta and s, and then a key that has a mnemonic utility. So for example, meta s g is for git grep, meta s r is for rip grep, rg, meta s z is for fzf, and things of that nature. The point is, what really matters here is two things. First of all of these have a common prefix, so it's very easy for me to remember them. But secondly, this follows the basic distinction between control and meta. And let's see why. Because these are all searches of sorts. And we know that the default search in Emacs is control and S. S representing, of course, search. But these being searches, they are more advanced than the standard search. Therefore, we should not use the control key. We should use the meta key. And because there are multiple, there are many of them, we cannot just use meta and S. Because there are many, we don't want to rule anything out. So we have to use meta and S as a prefix and then add another key to the end of it. So this is what I have done over here, and therefore I am able to define all these wonderful functions that I have also demoed in some of my, actually in all of my videos I have demoed these. Another thing that you can see over here is if you check this one, this specific command over here, it is an extension of the built-in query and replace. And what this basically does is it allows you to replace the word at point and all the iterations of it very quickly. It's very nice. What matters though is that I am using here the conventions and the mnemonics that Emacs also uses, and doing so I am able to expand my knowledge of the keys that I need to use. And as you can see here, I can extend these principles to other possible key combinations. For example, meta S and then the letter F could do something with files, for example. Meta S and the letter D could do something with directories, and so on, so forth. Mnemonics allow you to scale your knowledge. Let's proceed. Custom key bindings. Emacs is of course meant to be used by you and you alone. It is not meant to be a general purpose kind of thing that one size fits all, as we say, so it fits into everyone's use case. Emacs is extensible, Emacs is introspectable, and this means that you can do whatever you want with it. So once you understand the basics, again, it's very easy to define your own keys and have these keys make sense and be easy to organize them and remember them. Again, I produce a table over here with some examples that involve the super modifier key. Super is also known in some commercial keyboards as the Windows key. So I have some key bindings here, which is, for example, super and O is an alias for the default Control X O. Super and B, Control X B, and the others as well. So I am in effect using, you can see the pattern here, I am using super as a shortcut, as an alias for Control X in this case, for these specific things. So it allows me, again, by mirroring the default conventions, to define key bindings that make common actions faster. But I don't deviate from what Emacs does, because this helps me remember both the original, so for example Control XO, but also the alternative that I have, the alias that I have, super and O and all the other aliases. If you read the manual, the official Emacs manual, you will be told that there are some keys that are reserved for private use. Control C and any key is reserved for users, as well as the function keys F5, F6, F7, F8 and F9. These are all for you to define as you will. Then there are some other keys that are reserved for major modes or minor modes, so for packages, let's say. And these are Control C and then some other control character or a digit. But don't worry too much about it, you can read the specific chapter in the official manual. What really matters though is that even those keys that are reserved for major modes, even those are editable as well. There is nothing that you cannot customize, you are not constrained in any way. What really matters though, if you want to have to be efficient and productive, is to follow mnemonics and the good conventions, and this way you will remember a lot of things and everything will be nice and tidy. Let's proceed. With all those granted, I am of the opinion that making best use of Emacs is something that will reward you over the long term. And the reason I am saying that is because if you are using a completion framework, you can define a scoring system which allows you, when you invoke Emacs, to surface the most frequent and the most recent commands that you are using. Therefore, it is very easy to hit Emacs and then type a key and get the function that you are looking for. And for example, I am currently using the Ivy completion framework. I switched back to it a few weeks ago maybe, and you can use it in tandem with either AMX or Prescient. I was using AMX, now I am using the other one, following a recommendation from another user. Thank you for that, by the way. And I think that this is absolutely great. Let me show it to you in practice. If you do MX and, for example, hit the letter B, it will bring up Bongo, which is what I am looking for. This is my music player. If I hit the letter M, it will bring up MU for E. This is exactly what I need. And this is the whole idea of it. You can use MX to both get to functions very quick, but also to economize on keys. So now I don't need, for example, Control C and B to call Bongo, or Control C and M to call MU for E. I can use MX for that, which is easier, I feel. Let's move on. You may have listened so far to everything I have to say, but still be of the opinion that you don't really care. You don't want all these bells and whistles that Emacs has. You just want a good text editor. To which I would answer first that my answer would be twofold, basically. The first thing is that if you insist on that mindset, then I believe you are still thinking that Emacs is a text editor. So you are making a mistake in that regard, because Emacs is not a text editor per se. But at any rate, if you insist, there is another way you can make best use of Emacs as a text editor, and that is to enable, to install and implement Evil Mode, which is an emulation layer that basically implements Vim keys and the modality and composability of Vim inside of Emacs. Evil Mode has a lot of full-time users, and there are lots of popular frameworks that make Evil Mode a first-class citizen. It is implemented in the entire experience that these frameworks provide. So evil mode is definitely worth considering. Or, this is what I want to move on to the next section, maybe you should not switch to Emacs at all. If you have heard everything I have said thus far, and you still feel that you are missing something, maybe Emacs is not what you are interested in. But let's talk a bit about this in some further detail. What I want to say is that there is no pressure. Oops, what happened? Sorry, yeah. Sometimes I am a bit clumsy. There is no pressure whatsoever to using Emacs. There is no one out there who will point a finger at you and judge you for not using Emacs. This will never, ever, ever happen. So let's discuss this in some further depth. People do not care if you use Emacs or not. There is no employer in this world that will double your wage just because you have your .emacs somewhere. If there is such an employer, please bring me in contact with them because I am interested in that type of job. There is no one who will invite you to their party so that you can entertain them with all those trivialities of Emacs, so that you can talk about these obscure things that Emacs has. No one is interested in that kind of thing. You will not win any social points by using Emacs. And another important thing to bear in mind is that Emacs will not, it will never, ever, in and of itself, make you an elite hacker. The fact that you are using Emacs will not make you an elite hacker. Of course, if you are a hacker at heart, you will appreciate what Emacs has to offer. You will really like the extensibility and introspectable nature of Emacs. But of course, if you are a hacker, you can get that in other places as well. Doesn't matter, you will enjoy Emacs as well. The point is that Emacs is just a tool for text-heavy operations, as we already mentioned. So it is one of many possible options out there. There may be better alternatives for you if you feel that those bells and whistles of Emacs are of no use to you. At any rate, Emacs is not a substitute for social status or prestige or anything else that is outside the scope of working with text. So let's proceed and see how that is. What I want to say is that if you already have a setup that is efficient and productive, why do you want to switch to Emacs? If you have listened to what I said earlier and are not interested in any of that, what is it that Emacs adds that you consider switching to it? Do you realize that Emacs is a platform and in some respect a state of mind, a way of living, if you want, a way of thinking about the computer? Are you absolutely sure that you want to proceed? Do you understand what this means? Because I am of the view that you should not switch to Emacs just so you can recreate your current setup. If your workflow is good enough, if you enjoy what you are doing, then it means that it is effective for the kind of job that you are working with. I suggest you stick with that. You won't get anything better by just switching to Emacs. And I believe there is no point in switching to Emacs to re-implement, to reinvent your current setup. I consider that a step sideways, a lateral step, and I think it is just too much busy work for too little value. And of course, this applies to other things as well. I happen to answer this question very often as of late. And this is, for example, people contact me and they ask me whether they should switch to the binary space partitioning window manager that I have been using for a couple of years now. And they ask me whether they should leave behind i3 or DWM or whatever it is they are using. And my answer is no, don't do it. If what you have works perfectly fine for you, why on earth would you want to switch to BSPWM to do the exact same thing that you are already doing, other than maybe you are curious or whatever. But when it comes to the point of being productive, you won't get much more productivity out of it if you want to do the same things. The grass is not always greener on the other side, as we always say. And let's proceed to the final section of this presentation, the fact that Emacs is a commitment. You have to put some real effort into it. This is not a project that you pick up over the weekend, and by the end of the weekend you are already an expert in it. It doesn't work that way. You cannot be an Emacs tourist. You may know, of course, that in the free software space, people tend to experiment with various options. They tend to switch GNU/Linux distributions or desktop environments or window manager. There are lots of possibilities, lots of things. I think that in principle this is a very good thing to do, because you experiment with new ideas, you learn a lot, you develop a more encyclopedic view of things, a more rounded opinion of things, and I think this is inherently good. I also think that you are able to distro hop and switch desktop environments or window managers, because there are lots of similarities between them. Going from one to the other is not really an interruption, it is just an extension of the same kind of ideas, and usually when it comes to window managers, for example, many of them also have similar key bindings, so it's very easy to be effective from day one. The same, of course, for desktop environments. I'm not saying they are all the same, but that the differences are secondary. You can always pick up the skills necessary fairly quickly. Whereas Emacs is very different indeed. It is a thing of its own. Maybe you want to consider it sui generis. You want to think of it as being in a league of its own, in a category of its own, in a genus of its own. To switch to Emacs, you must be prepared for what is to come. It is like changing your habits. You have a longer term goal in mind, so whatever it is that you are doing is working towards that end, and you understand the consequences of your decision, you understand what your choices mean over the long term, and are willing to follow them through. For example, an example from real life. You would never relocate to a mountain. You will never do that out of your own volition and then wonder where are all the accompaniments, all the accoutrements of city life, of the quotidian life in a city. You would never do that. You will move to a mountain and you understand perfectly well what it means to be in a remote area. You make a conscious decision. You know what to expect. And this is the same with Emacs. Emacs requires deliberation. It expects you to think things through so that you do not set up yourself for failure. And I think this is very important, because if you don't put in the work, if you don't really pay attention to what I mentioned earlier and just frivolously switch to Emacs thinking that it is just a weekend product, you will be disappointed. You will not get what you are expecting, and then you might also go to various fora and complain that Emacs is this thing that weird people use, and this is not very fruitful and productive. No one benefits from that. If you are expecting Emacs to be a more powerful, a more efficient editor, like the one that you already use, and to be that kind of thing out of the box, you will be disappointed. So you need to align your expectations with the reality of what Emacs is and what it represents. And in order to align your expectations, you need to be well informed. If you are not informed, you cannot possibly form the right expectations and you will be disappointed. So you cannot be an Emacs tourist. Moving on. This is what I like to call the Emacs mindset, and I already discussed this in a previous video blog where I talked about the Emacs mindset and the Unix philosophy. Emacs is the way I see it, the way I experience it on a daily basis, and I think this is true for most seasoned Emacs users. Emacs is your conduit to an integrated computing environment. It is the means with which you will achieve this singular computing experience, the idea that everything is integrated and works predictably. Because fundamentally, you want to switch to Emacs because you are a power user. You want to have control, to exert control over your computing interfaces. You don't want to have inconsistencies in your work. You want things to be predictable and consistent. And in order to achieve that, you need to integrate things into a single platform and to exert full control over that platform. Customize it and modify it and all that things. Furthermore, you enjoy learning and understand very well that whatever it is that you want to do, you need to read the documentation. You always need to read the docs. There is no other way around it. You have to read the fabulous manual, RTFM. Of course, F means something else in this context, but you know what I mean. So this is the Emacs mindset, as I like to call it. Are you already a power user in the terminal? Do you use all those Unix tools, maybe with scripts that you write, shell scripts? Maybe you are using Emacs and Vim for your text editing and things of that nature. You maintain your custom desktop environment, your custom window manager, desktop session, whatever, and you have your dot files that you deploy and you get up and running very quickly. Do you enjoy tweaking every aspect of this custom environment, of your CLI, of your tools and everything? If the answer to these is yes, then I firmly believe that you have the right outlook. And this is why I would encourage you to give Emacs a fair chance if you already are that kind of power user. I say use it for, 2 months full time. Of course, this is just a random number. Maybe depending on your skills, you need less than that or maybe some more. It doesn't really matter. The point is to allow Emacs to have your undivided attention. Remember, you need to spend some time and to put the effort into this. And I firmly believe that you need to put the effort into it because there is no shortcut to developing expertise. This applies to every aspect in our life, to every field of endeavor. So whether you go with the default Emacs distribution, which is not particularly great out of the box, or you use some of the popular frameworks that are available out there, or maybe someone else's configurations. Perhaps you copy my .emacs and you use that. Whatever it is that you are doing, you still need to read the documentation. To become proficient, you must put in the effort. You must put in some real work. You have to earn it. This is how life works for everything. Emacs will become your friend. It will be an extension of your will once you know what exactly it is that you are telling it to do. And this is where introspection comes into play, because you need to learn by example. You need to read the source code from time to time. You need to study the help pages or to see what other people are doing. And of course, most of these, if not all of these, can be done inside of Emacs. If you really want to do it, everything can be done inside of Emacs. At any rate, you should always bear in mind, you should always remember that Emacs is not for tourists. And this is not some tacit elitism. I am not implying that Emacs users are some super smart group of people and that everyone else is a simpleton or a moron or whatever. It's none of that. That's silly. I am not saying that. What I am saying is that Emacs is a very powerful tool, and this is a matter of fact. And because Emacs is not a toy, it means that it has a steeper learning curve than what a simplistic kind of implementation would have. And because it has a steep learning curve, you need to be patient, you need to persevere the first difficult days of it, and then once you pass that mental block, because it's usually just a mental block, you can start really appreciating how things are put together, and then you can master this tool. It takes time, like every kind of expertise that you need to develop. Then, what we have here is, let's say that you have decided to switch to Emacs, and now you ask the question, should I go with the standard Emacs distribution, the vanilla Emacs experience, or should I just use an Emacs framework or an Emacs distro and call it a day? Here I can only speak from personal experience, because I switched to Emacs in July of this year, so just a few months ago. Today it's the 20th of December 2019, and I can just speak for myself here from personal experience. I started from scratch, and so my .emacs in day one was just a blank file, and I gradually built the skills from there. I came to Emacs from the background of a terminal, of a CLI power user. I was using Vim and Tmax. I was using Vim without any plugins, by the way. I was using Tmax, all the Unix tools, a tiling window manager, and I switched to Emacs. But when I switched, I had no expectations. I understood that I have to give it some time, what I mentioned earlier of offering Emacs my undivided attention. I did not rush to copy my previous setup and was not upset that I was not able to do the same things from day one. I kept an open mind, and I wanted to be exposed to the defaults in order to have a more informed opinion about them, rather than just going by what others say. And in hindsight, this is the right approach, because what others say is not always well informed either. So I gradually built up the skills, and I think now I am in a position where I can really enjoy using Emacs full time. This has been the case, I would argue, from 1 month of usage. I was very effective using Emacs, and I didn't miss anything from my previous setup. And just for the record, my .emacs now is just more than 22,000 words. It is literate programming, so it combines natural language with code. So if you just take the code, it's much shorter, of course. But the point is that I am able to do all those wonderful things inside of Emacs: read my email, my RSS feeds, write prose, write code, do presentations as I am doing right now. Everything inside of Emacs. This is fantastic. I have consistent themes, consistent fonts, consistent key bindings. It's everything. Everything is done to reduce the friction between what I have in my mind and what I want to instruct the computer to do. I feel that everything flows easier this way. So let's move on to this. I really like this approach, as you can understand, of course, because I think it allows you to organically grow your skills. It allows you to understand how the various parts are pieced together and how the emergent system is conceived, how it is constituted, rather, how it is designed. You can understand every aspect of it. And I think doing so, especially with regard to Emacs, is great, because you are building your own tool. This is what we mentioned earlier as well. Emacs is meant to be used by you and you alone. So if you start from scratch, you can really put the care that you have to put into developing your own tool. It matters that it works for you, not for a million other people. That's irrelevant. So personally, I can only ever recommend this path. I can never tell you that you should go and just use a framework. I think that's not the right way to approach Emacs. Because going down the vanilla way, down that path, is the best way to understand the peculiarities of Emacs and to really appreciate what I said earlier about extensibility and introspection. It is great to do it that way. And it will help you, of course, understand why Emacs is unique. And this is parenthetically, and I must say this, that key bindings are not the important thing of Emacs. So if you tell me that some application has Emacs keys, it still is not emulating Emacs. To emulate Emacs, you need to have extensibility and introspection. Otherwise, you are just re-implementing GNU read line. That's a completely different thing, the key bindings. Forget about that. Now, with regard to frameworks, I must say that I am not against them per se. I think that they offer a very polished and a very nice experience, and I think that by using a framework you can be productive in virtually no time. So you don't have to go and understand everything that I said here, or introspection, to write your own eLisp or your own .emacs, to make sure that your key bindings are efficient and that scale nicely, minimonix, and all those things. You can skip all that and just use a framework and be productive in virtually no time. I think, however, that is not the right way. I still think that, because in doing so, you deprive yourself of a unique opportunity. You deny yourself this unique opportunity to learn by doing. Because when you have a complex system that is an Emacs framework or distribution, it can be very challenging, especially if you don't have the frame of mind of Emacs users. It can be very challenging to really appreciate how it is pieced together. So you cannot really understand what is Emacs, what is an Emacs extension, what is the framework. You cannot really tell the differences. And this is something, the learning by doing is something that I think is a it's a very good piece of advice for other things as well in the free software space. For example, I firmly believe that you should install at least once Arch Linux or Void Linux or whatever the right way. So don't use an install script that someone else has written, even though that may be very convenient. Again, you are not learning. And if you want to really appreciate what these options have to offer, you have to do it the way that they intended to be done. That way you can learn as well, so you won't go around asking questions that you would have answered yourself if you have done things properly. The same with Emacs. Moving on to the last points, let's recapitulate why, when you would want to switch to Emacs or not. I think that whatever you do, you shouldn't take Emacs lightly. Emacs, we said, is its own thing. You have to pay attention and you have to put in the effort. So I would say, in conclusion, you should consider switching to Emacs if you want to fulfill any of the following, which is to realize the potential of the Emacs mindset, what I said earlier, the idea of having an integrated computing environment, to have a singular experience in your computer. You can do that with Emacs. You may want to learn eLisp or some other kind of Lisp, and Emacs usually is great for doing that kind of thing. You might want to engage with the Emacs community, which in my experience thus far is the friendliest community, I must say, in the free software space. Of course, this is just my experience thus far. I don't purport to be an authority. I'm not saying that other communities are not friendly, but especially in the Emacs space, I have never seen any kind of toxicity with regard to how the community treats newcomers or other users. It's usually very friendly and very informative. However, of course, as I have said in another video blog, don't expect people to spoon feed you. This does not work. You have to put in the effort, as we said, and you have to read the documentation. So don't be disappointed if people will ignore answers, questions that would be answered if you were to put in some effort. But it's still a very friendly community. And the last point you may want to consider Emacs for it is a bit more abstract, if you will, and this is that you see knowledge as an end in itself. So you want to learn about Emacs just because you are curious, just because you have an inquisitive nature and you are dubitative, you always doubt things, so you want to see what Emacs is all about, and I think that's also a good reason why you might want to switch to Emacs. Personally, I tick all those boxes. I wanted to switch to Emacs for all of these, and I am happy to have done so. Conversely, let's discuss the reasons why you may not want to switch to Emacs. Let's remind ourselves of them. If you are already happy with what you've got, you don't have to switch to Emacs. You won't get anything, you won't get a more powerful editor just by switching to Emacs. You should not switch if you are not willing to unsettle yourself in any kind of way. If you are not willing to disturb anything in your life, in your computing life, then you should definitely not consider Emacs, because Emacs is a disruptive change. It will have far-reaching implications in every aspect of your computing, and chances are that if you like what you are getting with Emacs, you will deprecate lots of the previous things that you were doing, the previous setup that you had. You will abandon it and switch to the Emacs mindset. But if you don't want to disturb anything, then of course Emacs is not for you. If you want something that just works out of the box for everything, then of course Emacs is not for you. Emacs is meant for people who understand that they have to put in the effort. It's an involved process. It's not something that works right away. Even if you use a framework, I would say, even then chances are that you would want to tailor things to your particular needs, but more so if you use the default Emacs distribution. And finally, of course, you should not consider Emacs if you want it to be a way to become more popular among your peers, to gain some social prestige or standing. Emacs is not for that kind of thing, and I think no text editor is for that kind of thing. But anyway, we are talking about Emacs here. So that's all I had to say, folks. This is the end of my presentation. This has been my presentation. As I said, this is plain text file. This is org mode. The markup is org mode. And I am just using, let's see it. This is Emacs, of course. This is plain text file, as I said, in org mode. Nothing special about it with regard to the format of this file. And I just have a small set of packages and some eLisp that I wrote that define the presentation of these slides. In particular, I have this function over here. You can see this function over here that basically centers the text, increases the font size, changes the cursor, how it looks, and things of that nature, basically to make it a bit prettier for the sake of the presentation. And this is something that I wrote earlier. It's very easy to do it once you know what to do. And I hook this specific function into the activation of the mode that narrows that creates those pseudo slides, and sorry, and you get this nice presentation just by adding a bit of code. So again, you see extensibility in practice, and I think this is the very last point I have to make, even though it's not in the presentation. It's that Emacs, the Emacs knowledge has a compounding effect. So the more you know about Emacs, the easier it gets to develop more advanced more advanced workflows. So the more customizations you have, the more eLisp you have written, the easier it gets to have another kind of extension. So I think in that regard, there is a diminishing cost to an extra unit of customization, if that makes sense. Diminishing costs to scale. So that's all for now, folks. I will link to my .emacs in the description in case you want to copy anything. Of course, as I said, you must always keep in mind what we talked about in this presentation and not just copy-paste things without willing to read or study anything. But I will link to it nonetheless because I think reading other people's code is a very good way of learning, and of course it is one of the core principles of free software that people will share the code and will learn from it that way. We are of course in favor of that, and GNU Emacs is of course the flag bearer of the GNU cause, of this political cause of free software. So that's all for now, folks. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope this video didn't drag for too long, but I don't know, I didn't keep any time. We will see. Thank you very much. Take care. Goodbye.